Israel has a duty to protect its own citizens.
Again, irrelevant to the question of occupying Palestinian territory. Yes,
Israel
a
has
duty to protect, but not a duty to protect which involves the indefinite subjugation of an entire other racial group.
Israel has valid, long-standing historical ties to the land.
No. Legally, no. Legally, no. I mean, that's the claim. It doesn't have any legal foundation. In the League of Nations a covenant that was part of the Versailles Treaty, the Palestine Mandate was supposed to be provisionally recognized as an independent state, a state for everyone, a single state for all the people on that land, not a state for a particular racial group. So the idea, and Israel is a Jewish state by definition, and there is no legal basis for a specifically Jewish state on that land in international law.
What is or would be Israel's strongest argument before a court of law?
For what? To dominate Palestinians? There is no argument for committing genocide. I mean, what would be what needs to be justified?
These come up often when I interview people who speak in defense of Israel.
Okay, self-defense.
Thank you.
Okay.
You took the words out of my mouth. This is the first thing that comes up.
Yes. So let's go back to 1967. So why is Israel there? There was a war between Israel and three of its neighbors. Israel started that war, and it was a war started preemptively, illegally, because states cannot use force lawfully in non-immediately imminent anticipatory self-defense. As a result of that illegal war, Israel captures the territory. It has no right, a state has no right to retain control over territory simply for security purposes. And the right of self-defense, therefore, is inapplicable to that kind of action. States have to deal with security threats non-forcibly when it comes to the extraterritorial use of force, unless they are at risk of an actual or an imminent attack. And Israel was not in 1967. It used force anyway. And of course, the clue is in the name. It was over in 6 days. There was no longer any threat. Insofar as there was a threat, it was removed through that action.
Well, they of course would disagree that there was no longer any threat. But what about in the context?
I don't think Israel would disagree that after the 6-day war, there was no then immediate threat of attack from the three Arab states. So Israel should have withdrawn at that moment. On the 7th day, there should have been a retreat, because there was no legal basis to maintain the control over the West Bank and the Gaza Strip.
What about in the context of Gaza today? And I'm taking you beyond, obviously, the remit of the ICJ's advisory opinion. But Israel today says more than ever that it is acting in Gaza in self-defense following the attacks by Hamas in Israel on October the 7th.
So Israel has been using force in Gaza since 1967, continuously. And on October the 6th, 2 years ago, Israel was already exercising military authority over Gaza, and as I say, illegally. In that situation, when a state is using force illegally, if there is violent resistance to that illegal use of force, the state's use of force does not somehow then become lawful as a means of defense to that defense. There is no defense against defense. It needs to be the return of all of the Palestinian people who were forcibly displaced and have been displaced from that land for a century. That's also a legal requirement.
Displaced since when? Are you talking 1948 or 1967?
No, since even before 1948, but certainly from the Nakba and 1947, 1948 and onwards. A legal right of return in international law that is vested in all of those people and their descendants. The remaining non-Jewish Palestinian people who were not forcibly displaced in 1948, but who are treated in various ways as second-class citizens within Israel, around 17% of the citizenry of Israel, That's unlawful. Steps to bring the situation to an end would include sanctions against Israel, aimed at influencing Israel's behavior. Non-recognition involves states, for example, not doing anything when it comes to their diplomatic relations with Israel, which involves expressly or implicitly recognizing not only that Israel isn't sovereign over this territory, but even that Israel doesn't have any right to be there in the first place. So states should not be engaging in diplomatic relations with Israel. And so that includes, for example, the current practice of affirming that somehow a right of self-defense would justify Israel's continued presence. Any state who affirms that position is violating the duty that they have not to recognize the validity and the legality of Israel's presence in that territory.
But you're not saying that countries, for instance, are required by international law to shutter their embassies in Israel. That's not what we're talking about.
They should not have embassies or any diplomatic representation to Israel on occupied territory. For example, in East Jerusalem. They shouldn't even have diplomatic premises in Jerusalem at all, because the status of Jerusalem as a whole, not just East Jerusalem, but also West Jerusalem, still is to be determined. And Israel is not sovereign in West Jerusalem. Hence, most states who recognize Israel as a state do not have their embassies to Israel in Jerusalem, even in West Jerusalem, because of that legal requirement that they cannot recognize an invalid claim to sovereignty over that city. In international law, the Palestinian people have a right to resist, a right to defend themselves from their subjugation and oppression, and to do so violently if necessary.